Toronto City Council is considering a motion to allow drinking in parks. Ward 12 Councillor Josh Matlow reintroduced a motion that would make it legal to drink in parks and at beaches that have washrooms. Tonight we're looking at how other cities across the country have handled the issue of drinking in parks, so maybe Toronto can learn a few things. Joining us live tonight, Laura Smith, Project Manager for Alcohol in Calgary Parks, Edmonton City Councillor Ann Stevenson, and Vancouver City Councillor Pete Fry. Laura, I'd like to start with you. For the City of Calgary, alcohol in parks returned yesterday. What's new this year compared to the initial pilot project?
Last year we had about 70 individual picnic tables. We've increased the number of tables, and we've also introduced large picnic sites, kind of like what Edmonton did last year, so 100 people could gather at those sites. And we've also got large areas that people can walk around, which is actually what Vancouver has done as well. So we made a couple of other small improvements. We've lifted the restriction of 2 hours at the table, and we've got instant booking now as well. So we offer bookings or first come, first serve.
Okay, so Anne, from your perspective, you've heard that Calgary took some advice from Edmonton. From your perspective, what type of feedback and concerns have you heard from residents as your city expands the initial pilot project as well?
Yeah, we did hear quite a bit of positive feedback from people who were able to access the alcohol consumption areas. Most of the negative feedback we received was in relation to people not being able to access, that the areas were booked. So there is definitely that pent-up demand there. At the same time, we did hear from some members of the community that they felt less safe and comfortable in park areas where people were consuming alcohol. So the work that we're doing this summer is really to quantify that, do more surveying and outreach to really refine some of those parameters to make sure that everyone can feel safe using our spaces.
So Pete, Vancouver's drinking in public is both an elected park board issue, unlike other Canadian cities, and a city council issue as well. What's been the issue residents have pushed back on the most with allowing public drinking?
I think there was a lot of initial concerns, but none of them really bore fruit. And as you mentioned, we have a separate elected park board. With our city council directed plazas, it's taken on a different dimension because we've worked with the local business improvement associations to help program those. And one of the things that we really recognized up front was that we needed to have appropriate facilities there, like washrooms, porta potties, that kind of thing. Having some programming works really well to sort of engage folks. And really, I mean, we to be honest, we already have, where we have issues with public drunkenness, we already have those regardless of having these plazas. So actually the plazas have been a pretty good option for folks. And in particular, a lot of smaller restaurants, through the pandemic, we changed our liquor laws to allow to-go booze from certain sandwich shops or that kind of thing. So it's allowed people to have a little al fresco picnic, support a local business, pick up a couple of beers, and actually have a meal. So we haven't seen a real case of a lot of abuse of this new option, and I think it's gone really well. And this will be our second year going forward with it.
So Laura, of course, a lot of this is pandemic inspired, giving people more time outside to potentially be safe and still hang out with family and friends. What's been the reaction among Calgary residents?
Yeah, Calgarians have actually been very supportive of the program. We did a survey and said about 70% of Calgarians really supported it. We also measured the participants of the program, and we found that over 70% visited parks more or visited new parks because of the program. So everybody's embraced it, and we really have had very few concerns too.
So Laura, let me just check in also too for businesses. How have they reacted to this, potentially people going to a park with their own alcohol versus going to an establishment?
Yeah, I suppose we maybe didn't have quite the experience that Edmonton, but maybe similar. So originally businesses were a little bit nervous, how would that affect them? But sure enough, quite a few of them started to do the sell a picnic basket with your paired bottle of wine, and that people could sort of pick up and go kind of thing. And of course, that was last year when all the restaurants were shut down, so it was actually a bit of a good thing for them.
So Anne, what advice would you have as Toronto debates a similar program now for city parks here?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think overall the experience has been really positive. It's a great way to bring more activity to our city parks. I think absolutely there's that equity piece. It's providing folks who live in higher density areas, which is something that we're trying to promote, in terms of more urban living. It really provides that access to folks in condos and apartment buildings to gather, in the city's backyard, which are our parks. So I would encourage my Toronto colleagues to support this and move forward.
And if I could follow up with you as well, what would you say to Toronto councillors when it comes to finding that balance for businesses as well, who might be losing out on some people sitting on patios?
Yeah, again, I think it's looking for those partnerships, those cross promotional opportunities. So the picnic baskets is a great idea. And I think always it's focusing on the behaviors, not the activities. So again, being sure that there's clear enforcement in place when there are behavioral issues, being sure that there's mechanisms in place to track that if there are problem spots. That data piece is really essential in ensuring that the enforcement is there when behaviors become inappropriate.
Mm-hmm. So Ann touched on the behavior there. So Pete, what's your reaction to some residents saying, why does it have to be so complicated when a lot of people already drink in parks without causing big problems? And if there is a problem, as you mentioned as well, why can't that be dealt with on a one-on-one basis with the current enforcement that's in place, whether that's police or bylaw?
Well, and I think it generally does when there's problems. But I think there's an important equity piece that was highlighted. And of course, Vancouver's an incredibly dense city, and a lot of folks don't have those spaces, especially during the pandemic, to do that, congregate and have friends over and enjoy, a cold beverage. But the other equity piece to this is that whereas, lots of people are out drinking, having a glass of wine on the beach, but it's interpreted differently for people of color, racialized populations, different populations that may feel over-policed and maybe don't feel quite as comfortable having that glass of wine on the beach because they might be treated differently. And I think that there's a really important distinction there that often gets overlooked. And that was one of the highlights of our approach to both the parks and the city plazas, was recognizing that some people's level of comfort based on their perceived vulnerabilities and perhaps over-policing was really reflected in saying, you know what, this is okay. This zone is okay for you to do that, and you don't have to worry about being singled out for drinking in public and that kind of thing. And I think that that's a big piece of what we saw through our approach.
All right, a very good point on the equity aspect right there. Pete Fry, Ann Stevenson, and Laura Smith, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see what Toronto ends up doing.